Hi, this is Jessica Dunn, and today we're going to discuss liquidity ratios. Now, financial ratios are important because it allows you to get greater insight into companies' performance by analyzing the balance sheet, income statement, and other financial statements. We care about financial ratios. They provide a lot of meaningful conclusions that you can draw, but it is important to remember that financial ratios are only an indication that there may be a problem. It is not a definitive answer that there is definitely a problem. It's always just let's take a further look into the company and see if we can identify why our financial ratios are different than they have been in the past, or why they are different than competitors. So we are going to look at liquidity ratios first, and liquidity ratios ask if the company can meet its short-term debt obligations with the resources that it currently has on hand. And so with liquidity ratios, the first liquidity ratio that we're going to cover is the current ratio. And the current ratio is current assets divided by current liabilities. Remember back when we talked about the balance sheet and we said that current assets are assets that we expect to convert to cash within 1 year, and current liabilities are those bills we expect to pay within 1 year. So we want to make sure that we have enough cash and cash-like assets on hand to meet those obligations as they come due. And so we're going to work through these ratio problems using the handout for chapter 3 that you can find on Canvas. And so we're going to use this to measure how well they're able to meet their obligations. And so the rule of thumb is we want a current ratio that is greater than 1. That means they have enough cash and cash-like assets to more than cover their obligations as they come due. So current ratio greater than 1 is the rule of thumb. And so using that balance sheet that is found online, we're going to take current assets and divide them by current liabilities. So first, look at the balance sheet. And the balance sheet says that current assets for 2021 are 1,223. Now remember, this is in thousands. That's 1,223,000. That's often true in financial statements that they truncate the zeros. And current liabilities, also on the balance sheet, are 620. So that gives us a current ratio of 1.97. So with that, we can see that it is greater than 1, so that's good. They should be able to meet their obligations as they come due. But that's not the full story. We know that current ratio greater than 1 is good. If the current ratio is less than 1, then there could be problems in the future because they may not have access to capital. They may not have good banking relationships that allowed them to draw cash as needed. They may not have predictable earnings to be able to pay those obligations as they come due. But that's not always the case. So less than 1 is not necessarily always bad, and greater than 1 is not always good, because a current ratio that is a lot greater than 1, the magnitude is much higher than 1, then that could indicate that the company is being too conservative. So they have a lot of cash and cash-like assets on hand. So maybe they're not investing properly. Maybe they need to be a little bit more aggressive, find new investment opportunities, or distribute that cash to the shareholders in the form of dividends. So it's not always good to see a company hoarding cash because that often causes managers to act in a more risky manner. So they may choose to pursue projects that are more risky than typical or don't generate an adequate return than they normally earn. So it is important to consider um, the the current ratio qualitatively as well as quantitatively. So it's a startup company is going to be drastically different than a large, well-known company. They're going to have drastically different current ratios. If a company is too aggressive, then they may have a current ratio that's too low and they may not be able to pay their bills as they're coming due. Um, but large, well-established companies have relationships with banks that allow them short-term credit and long-term loans in the event that they do have a need for liquidity. Smaller firms don't always have the same access to credit, and they may have to operate with more cash on hand. In theory, all current assets can easily be converted to cash, but this is not always the case. The value of inventory reported on the balance sheet may not accurately represent the market value of that inventory, and this is especially true if your company is in financial distress. You're often in financial distress because you can't sell your inventory. So a more conservative measure of liquidity is the quick ratio. The quick ratio is current assets minus inventory divided by current liabilities. So with the quick ratio, we can use our income statement and balance sheet to calculate the quick ratio that is available on Canvas. So our current assets are 1223, 1,223. Deduct from that inventory, which is found directly above current assets, 289. And divide that by current liabilities, 620. So this is a more conservative measure of liquidity because it is deducting inventory from our current assets. And inventory is the least liquid of our current assets. This gives us a quick ratio of 1.51. The same rules apply to the quick ratio as did the current ratio. A number greater than 1 is good. So high is better. The higher it is, the better it is, up to a point. At some point, that means that the company's hoarding cash. And here is an illustration of that. So here we're looking at 3 different companies, Dell, Home Depot, and Lowe's. And we see that all 3 have a current ratio of 1.3. So this is greater than 1, so that's good. That's the rule of thumb. They should be able to meet their obligations as they come due. All 3 are well-established companies. They probably have great access to credit. But then when we look at their quick ratio, it tells a different story. We see that Dell's quick ratio is 1.2, while Home Depot's is 0.4 and Lowe's is 0.2. And when you think about this qualitatively, this makes sense. Dell is a computer manufacturing company. Computer parts go down in value every day. So they don't want to have a lot of excess inventory on hand because technology is being replaced very rapidly. So their current ratio and quick ratio both being about the same is a good thing. Home Depot and Lowe's, they're both large warehouse stores that held items that are not declining in value very rapidly. A 2x4 today is going to be about the same price as a 2x4 next month. So it is not worrisome that Home Depot and Lowe's have large amounts of inventory that cause their quick ratios to be very low because they are having to fill huge warehouses full of goods that don't decline in value rapidly.